where control actually begins. Consider this carefully before anything else. Most people believe control is about strength, discipline, or force of will. They assume it begins with action, what you do, what you resist, what you endure. But this assumption is already misplaced. Long before action, something quieter has already occurred. A judgment has been made. Events themselves arrive without instruction. A comment is spoken. A delay happens. A plan fails. None of these carry disturbance on their own. Disturbance appears only when the mind assigns value, meaning, or threat to what has occurred. The moment you say, "This is unacceptable, this should not be happening," or "This means something about me," control has already been surrendered. Stoic discipline does not attempt to manage events. It refuses that task entirely. It returns responsibility to the only place it can be carried, judgment. What troubles you is not what happens, but the verdict you silently deliver about it. This is not comforting. It removes excuses. It also restores authority. If judgment is the source of disturbance, then judgment is also the beginning of control. Not through suppression. Not through denial. But through clarity. Through noticing what the mind adds, automatically and without permission. This discipline asks for no optimism and offers no reassurance. It asks only for accuracy. Responsibility cannot be outsourced to circumstances, other people, or outcomes. It rests with you, precisely because judgment does. Hold this distinction. What actually belongs to you? Everything that follows depends on one clear distinction. Before discipline can be discussed, ownership must be precise. Much of what people call self-control fails because they are trying to command what was never theirs. They attempt to manage outcomes, other people's reactions, or the course of events. When this effort collapses, as it always does, they conclude that discipline itself is impossible. The error is not lack of effort. It is misdirected authority. According to Stoic discipline, very little belongs to you. This is not pessimism. It is clarity. What belongs to you is your judgment, your intention, your assent, and your chosen response. These are internal acts. They cannot be forced from you by circumstances. Everything else, health, reputation, timing, results, the behavior of others, does not belong to you, regardless of how strongly you wish it did. This distinction is uncomfortable because it removes a familiar refuge. Complaints often hide an assumption of ownership. When you think, "This should not have happened," you are claiming authority over events. When you think, "They should understand," you are claiming authority over another mind. Stoic discipline denies both claims. Not to harden you, but to make effort accurate. Consider a simple example. You send a message and receive no reply. The silence itself is neutral. What belongs to you is the judgment that follows. You might decide the silence is disrespect. Or you might decide it means nothing yet. The reply does not belong to you. The interpretation does. When frustration appears, it is not because of the delay. It is because judgment reached beyond its boundary. Or consider criticism. Words are spoken. Sound reaches the ear. This is all that has happened. Whether those words become an insult, a threat, or a correction depends on the judgment you grant them. The speaker's intent is not yours to command. Your assent is. When you treat another person's opinion as if it were under your authority, disturbance is guaranteed. Stoic discipline begins by returning effort to its rightful domain. Not because the external world is unimportant, but because it is unstable. What depends on others will always waver. What depends on events will always shift. What depends on judgment alone can be trained. This is why discipline feels weak when ownership is confused. Energy is spent resisting what cannot be resisted. When effort is redirected inward, strength appears, not as force, but as steadiness. You stop arguing with reality. You begin working with what is yours. The boundary is not harsh. It is exact. And until it is held clearly, No amount of resolve will produce control. This explains where effort is misplaced, but not yet how disturbance takes hold. The moment you agree. Now we look at what actually creates disturbance. The distinction between what is yours and what is not explains where effort belongs. But it does not yet explain why disturbance appears so quickly and so reliably. For that, Stoic discipline examines a precise internal sequence, one that unfolds quietly, often unnoticed. First comes the impression. An impression is automatic. A sound, a sight, a memory, a bodily sensation, a thought. It arrives without invitation. You do not choose it. You are not responsible for its arrival. Stoic discipline never demands control at this stage, because none is possible. Next comes judgment. This is where the impression is interpreted. Meaning is assigned. The mind says, this is bad, this is unfair, this threatens me, or this should not be happening. Judgment transforms a neutral impression into something charged. This step often happens so quickly that it feels inseparable from the impression itself. But they are not the same. Then comes assent. Assent is agreement. It is the moment the mind says, yes, this judgment is correct. This is the critical point. Impressions arrive uninvited. Judgments arise habitually. But assent is optional. Even when it feels immediate, it is still a choice. Disturbance does not come from impressions. It does not come from initial reactions. It comes from assent to a judgment that has not been examined. This is why two people can experience the same event and respond differently. The event is identical. The assent is not. Consider a familiar example. You are criticized in a meeting. The impression is simple, words are spoken. A bodily reaction follows, perhaps heat, tension, a quickening pulse. None of this is under your control. Then a judgment appears, I am being attacked or this undermines me. If assent is given immediately, disturbance follows. Anger, defensiveness, or withdrawal appear as if automatically. But what actually occurred was agreement with a verdict that had not been tested. Or consider delay. A plan is interrupted. Time is lost. The impression is delay. The judgment says, this is a waste, this should not happen, I am being obstructed. If you assent, frustration appears. If you withhold assent, even briefly, the impression remains, but disturbance does not form. Stoic discipline does not require suppressing feeling. Feelings will arise. The body reacts. The mind produces impressions. Discipline begins at the narrow point where agreement is granted. This is where freedom exists. Not freedom from sensation, but freedom from compulsion. The pause before assent may be brief. It may feel insignificant. But it is sufficient. In that pause, you can ask whether the judgment belongs to you, whether it concerns what is in your control, and whether agreement is necessary. Often it is not. This mechanism is impersonal. It does not accuse. It does not console. It simply describes how disturbance is manufactured. Once seen clearly, responsibility becomes unavoidable. But so does possibility. Understanding the mechanism does not create discipline. Understanding this does not change behavior. Why discipline is not force. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. Discipline is often imagined as pressure applied to oneself. Teeth clenched. Emotion suppressed. Endurance admired. In this model, discipline is a kind of internal violence, a battle between what you feel and what you think you should do. Stoic discipline rejects this entirely. Not because effort is unnecessary, but because force is ineffective. Force attempts to overpower impressions after assent has already been given. By that point, disturbance is established. The body is activated. The mind is narrowed. What follows is resistance, not control. You may hold yourself back temporarily, but the cost is tension. This is not discipline. It is strain. Stoic discipline is training, not coercion. It works earlier and more quietly. Its aim is not to eliminate impressions or emotions, but to train the point at which assent is granted. This requires repetition, not intensity. Precision, not willpower. Consider how habits form. You do not build strength by lifting a maximum weight once. You build it by lifting a manageable weight repeatedly, with attention. The same applies here. The mind is trained through repeated, deliberate pauses before assent. Each pause reinforces the capacity to choose. Over time, this becomes stable. This is why discipline fails under pressure when it has not been practiced beforehand. In moments of stress, the mind reverts to what is familiar. If judgment has never been examined calmly, it will not suddenly become clear under strain. Training must occur before it is needed. This is not a moral demand. It is a mechanical one. Stoic discipline does not promise emotional neutrality. Emotions will arise. Anger, fear, disappointment, these are impressions accompanied by bodily responses. Discipline does not aim to erase them. It aims to prevent them from issuing commands. Feeling anger is not failure. Acting under unexamined anger is. Repetition matters more than resolve. Each time you notice a judgment forming and refrain from immediate assent, you strengthen a capacity. Each time you notice too late and reflect afterward, you still train awareness. There is no dramatic breakthrough. There is accumulation. This approach removes drama from self-improvement. There is no internal enemy to defeat. No part of you must be crushed. The mind is not an adversary. It is an instrument that has been used carelessly and must be handled with skill. Discipline, then, is not about being hard on yourself. Harshness creates resistance. Resistance obscures judgment. Discipline is firm but neutral. It notices. It pauses. It chooses. This also explains why discipline cannot be improvised. You cannot decide, in the middle of disturbance, to suddenly possess a trained response. You can only rely on what has been practiced already. This is why Stoic training emphasizes small, ordinary moments. They are where habits are built. When discipline is understood as training, responsibility becomes practical rather than burdensome. You stop demanding immediate results. You attend to repetition. You allow progress to be incremental. This is not inspiring. It is effective. And effectiveness is the only measure that matters. Training remains abstract unless it appears in daily life. Practicing calm in ordinary moments. This practice is proven in ordinary moments. Stoic discipline does not wait for crisis. It is built in what seems insignificant. Small delays. Minor discomforts. Everyday friction. These are not interruptions to practice. They are the practice. The first exercise is anticipating impressions without anxiety. Each day will bring inconvenience. Plans will shift. People will act according to their own judgments. This is not pessimism. It is accuracy. When you expect ease and encounter resistance, judgment reacts sharply. When you expect friction and meet it calmly, judgment remains steady. Anticipation here does not mean rehearsal of disaster. It means reminding yourself, quietly and without emotion, that impressions will arrive. Noise will occur. Delays will happen. Criticism will appear. By acknowledging this in advance, you remove the element of surprise that often accelerates assent. When something predictable occurs, it has less force. The second exercise is pausing before assent. This pause does not need to be dramatic. One breath is sufficient. The pause is not used to argue with the impression or to replace it with positive thinking. It is used to prevent immediate agreement. In that brief space, you allow the judgment to be seen rather than obeyed. For example, a minor inconvenience arises. A line moves slowly. A task takes longer than expected. The impression is irritation. The body tightens. This is normal. Discipline appears when you pause and notice the judgment forming. This should not be happening. You do not need to refute it. You simply refrain from agreeing. The irritation may remain, but it does not command behavior. This pause is the core of Stoic practice. It is where freedom operates. Without it, training remains theoretical. With it, even imperfectly applied, the mechanism begins to change. You are no longer dragged forward by the first verdict that appears. The third exercise is the evening review, conducted without guilt or praise. At the end of the day, you briefly recall moments where judgment went unexamined and moments where a pause occurred. The purpose is not self-criticism. Guilt is itself an unexamined judgment. Praise is equally unhelpful. Both distort clarity. You simply observe. Where did assent happen too quickly? Where was it delayed? Where was it withheld? This review is factual, not moral. You are collecting information, not issuing sentences. Over time, this reflection sharpens awareness during the day. The mind learns what is being watched. These practices are intentionally modest. They do not require isolation, silence, or ideal conditions. They fit into ordinary life because ordinary life is where impressions arise. Discipline that cannot function under minor pressure will not function under major strain. It is important to note what these practices do not aim to accomplish. They do not aim to make you feel calm at all times. Calm may appear, or it may not. The aim is to prevent feeling from issuing unexamined orders. Emotional weather will change. Authority does not have to change with it. Consistency matters more than intensity. Practicing once with great effort and then abandoning the practice teaches nothing. Practicing lightly, repeatedly, teaches the mind what to do. The change is gradual. It is often unnoticed until disturbance decreases without effort. This is how Stoic discipline avoids force. Nothing is suppressed. Nothing is dramatized. Attention is simply placed where choice exists. Over time, this placement becomes familiar. When this practice becomes stable, reactions slow. Not because life has become easier, but because judgment has become trained. The external world remains unpredictable. Internal response becomes reliable. From practice, sovereignty emerges. What remains under your command? Freedom is often misunderstood. Most people imagine freedom as relief from difficulty. Fewer obstacles. Better outcomes. Less friction from others. Stoic discipline rejects this definition completely. Not because it is unrealistic, but because it places freedom where it cannot survive. Anything dependent on circumstances can be taken. Anything dependent on others can be withdrawn. Stoic freedom is narrower and more durable. It is the condition in which judgment remains under your authority regardless of what occurs. This freedom does not prevent hardship. It prevents captivity. Life does not become easier through discipline. Events still interrupt. Bodies still tire. Other people still act according to their own judgments. What changes is not the world, but the location of command. Authority returns inward, where it can be maintained. This distinction matters. Comfort is fragile. It depends on arrangement. Silence, cooperation, stability, approval. When these are present, comfort appears. When they are not, it disappears. Freedom, as Stoic discipline defines it, does not rely on any of this. It relies only on whether you grant assent to judgments that claim authority over what is not yours. Consider what cannot be taken from you. A delay cannot force you to agree that it is an insult. A criticism cannot compel you to accept it as a verdict on your worth. An outcome cannot require you to declare it catastrophic. These agreements are internal acts. They remain optional. This does not mean indifference. You still prefer certain outcomes. You still act, plan, and correct. Stoic discipline does not remove preference. It removes compulsion. You can work toward results without surrendering inner command to them. This is why freedom, in this sense, is not an achievement. It is a condition that must be maintained. Each day presents opportunities to hand authority outward again. Each day requires renewed attention. There is no final state where discipline becomes unnecessary. Freedom is preserved through vigilance, not force. Through repeated refusal to confuse what is desired with what is commanded. Through steady recognition that responsibility ends where control ends. This understanding prevents a common error. Some expect Stoic discipline to produce constant calm. When agitation appears, they conclude the practice has failed. This expectation itself is a judgment that demands comfort. When comfort is taken as a requirement, freedom is already compromised. Stoic discipline allows agitation without surrender. You may feel pressure without obeying it. You may experience loss without declaring yourself ruined. You may encounter hostility without becoming hostile in return. None of this is dramatic. It is simply accurate. What remains under your command is limited. But what is limited can be guarded completely. Judgment, assent, intention, these do not fluctuate unless you allow them to. When you stop asking the external world to cooperate with your peace, peace becomes stable. This is not resignation. It is alignment. Effort is applied where it can succeed. Expectation is withdrawn where it cannot. The result is not invulnerability, but reliability. Nothing outside you must change for this to begin. Nothing outside you can complete it. Maintenance is continuous. Authority is reclaimed moment by moment. The principle is complete. Holding inner sovereignty. This ends where responsibility begins. Nothing presented here is complex. It is only demanding. Disturbance does not come from events. It comes from judgments. Control does not appear through force. It appears through clarity. Freedom is not comfort. It is inner authority maintained in changing conditions. This discipline offers no protection from difficulty. It offers something narrower and more reliable, the ability to meet difficulty without surrendering command of your own judgment. When responsibility is kept where it belongs, confusion decreases. When confusion decreases, effort becomes effective. There is no point at which this work is finished. Judgment must be examined repeatedly because impressions continue to arrive. The mind continues to interpret. The opportunity to assent or withhold assent appears again and again, often in small, unimpressive moments. That is where the practice lives. Imperfection is not an obstacle here. It is expected. You will assent too quickly. You will notice too late. This does not invalidate the discipline. It reveals where attention is still needed. Responsibility does not mean fault. It means ownership. Nothing outside you needs to improve for this practice to function. Circumstances may remain difficult. People may remain uncooperative. Outcomes may remain uncertain. None of this removes your authority over judgment unless you grant it. The work is simple. It is not dramatic. It does not escalate. It requires steadiness rather than intensity. And it belongs to you alone. Return to the pause.